Grüezi miteinander. I, I used to live here, so I feel very at home being back here. I was here for a year, like a long time ago, so I still don't remember how to speak. So I'm not going to give this talk in Swiss German or anything. But that's the extent of what we're going to talk about today in that. So I'm so excited to be here with you all and see all of your beautiful faces and talk about serverless functions in Vue.js. It's a really exciting subject, and it's kind of clickbaity, so we'll kind of dive in. So how many of you can predict the future? Are there any Bitcoin millionaires in the house or like early Apple investors? Oh, a few. Okay. Well, maybe we can all like learn from you soon. Well, for the rest of us, the best case scenario when we launch an app is that we jump around in formalware, we're super excited, but immediately, we have to scale our server. And I think we all want to feel like we probably look like this while we're doing that. We have a dope hoodie on, and we're so good at programming that our fingers are literally on fire. But in reality, we probably look a little more like this. We're in our sister's borrowed rain jacket. We can't find the Q key, and even if we do, we're not sure that that's going to let us exit Vim. And what about the more likely scenario that you don't exactly fail, but you just didn't get as many signups out of the gate as you thought you were going to? Well, in that case, you have this kind of awkward situation of John Travolta's in your empty wallet. You're spending a ton of money on the server, and it's so awkward to kind of explain to the VPs why John Travolta's there. And you could scale down, but like, what if it kicks up again? So that brings us to serverless. It's the most interesting thing with a really clickbaity title, because it's true. The first thing that someone's going to tell you when you talk about serverless is, well, you know, you're still using servers, and that's accurate. But the promise of serverless is that we're spending less time setting up and maintaining a server. What we're focusing on today is the part of serverless architecture that boils down to functions that state, when this request comes in, run this code. And for that reason, we refer to them sometimes as FAS, or functions as a service. My name is Sarah Drasner. I'm Sarah Edo on Twitter. I work for Microsoft. And I'm a Vue core team member. I also work as a staff writer for CSS Tricks. I'm here today. I also work at Microsoft as a senior developer advocate, so I'm going to be using Azure for a lot of these examples, but you can also get all of these things going with other services as well. All right, so some of the benefits include, but do not limit to, the situations that you saw before. You're only paying for what you use. As you scale things up and down, you're only paying for the things that you're actually deploying. And serverless is actually really not well priced, but for the consumer. Like, it's really cheap. Somebody like Amazon made it super cheap, and then everybody competed at Amazon's level, and now you pay very, very little to use serverless functions. So we're also spending less time setting up and babysitting a server. And it's the same concept as functional programming that we know and love. We're breaking things down into these small reusable bits, which means that if you need to use the same thing for another application, you totally can do that. It's the same kind of logic. And something that I quite like about it is it's the principle of least power in computer programming, which basically states that you're using the least powerful premise for any given idea. So there's a lot of these as-a-service things out there. I mentioned they're functions as a service. So I made this SVG animation to kind of show what each of these services means. So we're going to run through a few of them. So everything below the waterline is what the service does for you. Everything above the waterline is what you do. So if we look at some of these, the first thing we see is infrastructure. So you're doing a lot. Platform. And then functions, you see, we're really only managing what's on the application level, which is super awesome. Okay, we usually deploy server-side software. We start with a host instance, and we deploy the application within the host. In a serverless paradigm, we remove both and replace it with a vendor FAS platform that we don't manage ourselves. So we'll deploy these functions to the platform, and this allows us to instead focus on the logic, which is expressed as individual functions. So unlike the earlier host and application model, the function isn't continually running. When an event is triggered, then the function is executed executed within the vendor container. So that's cool. Should we serverless all the things? No, not really. Serverless doesn't do well for long-running things. Anything where you have a WebSocket connection, like let's say you have real-time updating social streams, like an event ticker or some sort of multiplayer online game, that's not a good thing for serverless. So what is it good for? It's really good for cleaning data on a cron job. It's really great for taking data and using it to create data visualizations, and it's cached on the server, so that actually makes it pretty performant. We're going to do that today a bit. You can crop images updated by the user and create a user profile, so that's really nice. I'm going to walk through all of these things in Azure, and one of the things that I'm not going to show you is how you can debug locally with Azure Functions inside VS Code, but that's a big thing that is really, really cool about using them. So if we go into the portal, the setup of a function is pretty trivial. We get a free account, we go into the portal like this, and we have a number of options here that mostly get populated for us. So one of the things that I want to point out here is, oh my god, I just started using Keynote. I'm like so excited about these transitions. Is this consumption plan part is actually pretty important. That's the model that will let you scale with your server. When you pick something else, then you have to kind of babysit it a little bit more. So you really want to keep it at that consumption plan. All right, so right away, they set us up with a test, which I've simplified and modified slightly to include tacos, which is pretty important. So we're going to pass in this request body, which is delicious tacos. Again, important. Then we've got this place where we're going to actually use that body. And we even have a thing that's like a context log, which is kind of like a console log. So here, if we run the function, you can see the output is hello, delicious tacos. Again, super important. And then we've got that yo, 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 yo down there. So that's how we're seeing what is going on. So what's really cool about this is it's the same functions that you know and love, but they're running on the server instead. So okay, let's do a pretty normal use case. And we're going to set up a function that will talk to Stripe and Vue and use serverless functions. And we're going to set up an e-commerce application so that we can accept payments and allow people to shop online. All right, so here's a sample Vue application that I made. There comes a time in any young app's life when we're going to want to monetize. And the most surefire way to make that more direct is to accept payments. So here we're embedding this Stripe payment form, and we're doing all of this stuff. And so we're kind of going through the motion of setting up our credit card, and we pay with the credit card. We've got a loader, and we see the success. So since we don't have the time to go look through this entire application, I'm giving you a bird's eye view of how everything is set up. So this is the structure of everything. I'm using Nuxt and Vuex, if you're not familiar with those. Basically, Nuxt is like React's Next, but the Vue version. So we're going to set up routing just through a pages directory. So any component that lives in that pages directory is just a Vue component, and it turns into a page. It turns into a route. Then in that Vuex store, that's our centralized state management, kind of like Redux. It's a similar kind of concept. And you can see it's talking to our serverless function and Stripe. So we're going to do the lowest hanging fruit first. It's really simple to set up a Stripe account, so let's do that really quick. So you set up your account, and once you confirm your email, you go into the API in the sidebar, and you click on that piece, and you can already see your testing key. So it already is all set up for you. And when you visit the Stripe documentation, they're going to expect Express. So here's some things that it's going to expect here. So Stripe charges, the amount, some details. It's pretty self-explanatory, but where we're going, we don't need Express. We're already executing on the server, so it actually simplifies our code quite a bit. So we're going to kick things off. We're going to add in our Stripe key. Our Stripe key probably isn't going to be XXXXX. You put your own testing key in there. That module.exports, that line is very intrinsic to Azure. So if you're using another service, you change out that line of code. And we're going to kick it off. After we do so, we're going to create this, the same kind of thing that we were doing in Express with their email and their token and pass in some amount and details. And then we'll finish everything up and provide some error logs. You'll note that I log a lot. It's because if anything goes wrong, I want to be able to track it down. All right, so now when we execute our function, in the test panel, you can see that we have some base charge. We've set up, a nobody at example.com. And then once we go through, all of the Stripe charges go through, and we have this has been completed in our output. And if we go back to the Stripe panel, we can see that they are talking to each other. We can see some testing customers going through and stuff. So it was a success. That's really great. Another step that I'm not showing here, but I wrote an article about on CSS Tricks, is how to set this all up on GitHub. So you don't even need to use the portal. You can just push to master and have everything work from there. So that's pretty cool. Now we have everything set up. On one side, we're going to connect everything to our other side with our serverless function in our app. So first, we're going to talk about that Vuex store and our cart.vue page, these two pieces here. So all of our products are in a big manifest object in our Vuex store. We're also storing what's in the cart as well as the cart total. So you can see here, as I add items, you can see the Vuex store updates. This is the Vue dev tools, if you've never seen them before. And here's the shape of what we're going to be building on the cart.vue page. First, if there's items in the cart, we'll add our checkout component. Then, if the cart is empty, we'll give them the ability to get back to the main page and add items. And finally, if there's a success, we'll let people know it's being processed, and we'll give them a success component. So we'll look at that first code block. We have some items in our cart, and we'll show a cart that reminds people of the items with a thumbnail, the quantity, and its price. And you can see there's some filters here for US dollar, which will basically do some currency conversion. So here's what this will look like. And we'll get the total by getting the values in the cart and creating a computed value here. So now that we're showing what's in the cart, we actually have to build out that checkout form with all of the Stripe details and our credit card. So here's what we'll eventually have, that cart, a place to put your email and credit card. And the easiest possible way to do this with Stripe is a component called Vue Stripe Checkout. I've linked up the repo here, and it basically is just like one single button that will trigger this modal, and you can do this whole checkout flow. It's really easy to implement, but something you might have noticed was we didn't have just a simple button. I actually made that form look like it was embedded in my site and styled it like my site, so it felt like it was more of that experience, and that's what I want to make. So I used something else. I used a thing called Stripe Elements. And Stripe Elements has an Angular version, it has a React version, it has all different versions. And what they allow you to do is basically take the most important pieces of Stripe, but still make forms the way that you normally would do, so you could still do all of the normal error handling and all the normal unit testing that and make it fully integrated with your site. So here's how I would install that with npm or yarn. And now we're going over that cart.vue page. We'll integrate the checkout.vue component where we use Stripe elements. Out of the box, the Vue Stripe Element Plus has a few defaults. A couple of notable things here. You'd put your Stripe key on that card component, and the button here has a pay method. When you see that @clickPay, that's a really important piece of here. That's where we're going to execute all the logic that talks to the server. So in the script in the same component, we have some imports, and you can see at the bottom that pay method. The create token here returns a promise which resolves in an object with a token or an error key. So now to configure it for our needs, we're going to need to store some data properties, including whether it was submitted, whether it was completed, the status, and the response. We'll also need to gather a little bit of information from our cart.vue component, which is the parent. We'll need the total as well as the success. So here we go. When someone clicks that form button, it kicks off the pay method where we have that create token promise, and now we've submitted our changes to Vue and post to the URL of our serverless function and send the email we collected to from the form as well as the total. And in case you're wondering where we got that URL from the serverless function, if we go back to the portal, it's that little circled piece right there. That's where you can get the function URL so that you can talk between them. I'm using Axios here. So after that's complete, we change the status to success, clear the cart with a mutation in Vuex, and log any errors. And we're going to go over that pay method really quickly again because it's pretty important. It's the most important part. So here we're using Axios to post our function to our function URL. We track whether or not we've submitted the form or not with this.submitted. It sends the email, the token, and our total to the serverless function. If it's successful, it commits to the Vuex store, mutation clears the cart, and emits to our parent component that the payment was successful. If it errors, it changes the status to failure, logs the error response for debugging. And while the function works its magic, of course I have to make some SVG animation happen. So I'm just basically making something that's entertaining enough because I don't know how long that request will take. It depends on the latency for wherever they might be in the world. If they're like in Indonesia or something, it might take a lot longer than if they're really near my data center. So that's really cool. Then, in the case of failure, I feel so bad for this cat. Poor cat. We'll let them know that something didn't quite work right and clear out anything set by that pay method, but not the cart, because we're going to let them try again. In the case of success, yes, we'll show a successful animation that gets some dopamine flowing. So we're going to go here, and we've got the loader and success. But we're also going to restart that cart so that they can continue shopping if they want to. So here we are now. There's that success.view component. It's a component of its own, but it's attached to that cart.view page. And it looks like this. I made a CodePen demo for you if you want to check out the code. We'll create a set timeout and restart the cart with a function on the parent emitted from here. So remember this view. OK, let's fill this out now. Cool. We created our cart, imported our checkout component that also tracks a successful payment. If the cart was empty, we let them fill it up and go back to the home page. And if the payment was successful, we show a success component, restart the cart on that set timeout, and clear out what we have. All right. You did it. Party. OK, so in this amount of time, that was only like, what, 10 minutes or so? And you now know how to create a successful cart component and attach it to an application and have it talk to a serverless function. Not too bad, right? OK, cool. In a real-life application, you do a few more things like unit testing and stuff, but both repos are open source. So I have the entire application open source as well as the serverless function. As I mentioned, is all hosted on GitHub, so you can go play with it, fork it, and make your own application and try it out. Cool. All right, in the time that we have left, let's do something different. I mentioned before that we're going to do some data visualization. So let's do some kind of interesting data visualization powered by a serverless function. So as I mentioned before, I work for Microsoft as a developer advocate, and people often ask me where my team is speaking and when. So I made this demo with Vue.js and a globe library with serverless functions and Vue so that people can explore where we all are at. So here I'm executing a serverless function to gather geolocation data for the pins that are on that globe for where we're speaking and what location and when. So I'm not going to go into a huge amount of technical detail for this part, but anything that I'm not talking about today is covered with that demo and a CSS Tricks article, along with the demo that's all open source. So we start out with this. I asked my coworkers to fill out this form that shows where they're speaking and when in a giant Excel spreadsheet, and I export all of their data using JSON. So I'm going to use that JSON file in my Vuex store in the central state management place to feed into my app. But what I need in order to make that data visualization work is some geolocation data for latitude and longitude. So I don't have that based on the location. I only have the location. So I need that information first. So the cool part is you already know how to set up a serverless function. There's a thing that we have that allows us to make serverless functions with GitHub webhooks. So that means anytime I change that data, anytime I commit to master with that Vuex store, I can run a serverless function to go through, check all the data that's in there, and repopulate that data right directly in GitHub for me, so I don't have to go look up any of that geolocation information at all for myself. The Google Maps API will do that for me, so I can be a lazy programmer and know that every time I bring in new information, it will just clean and store the new information that I need. So here we're going to retrieve some geo information from each item in the original data. Not shown here will error if it doesn't go well. Great. Now, given an array of entries wrapped in an iterator, we're going to walk through each of them and populate the latitude and longitude using the Google Maps API. We're also going to cache some locations to try to save some API calls. And after this, that's not shown here, we're going to check the cache to see if we have already looked up this location as well. So here's that function at work. You can see all of the locations in the JSON file. It's looking up the locations, and it's populating all of the latitude and longitude in that context.log. So we can now use this for our Three.js globe, and we're doing this all on the server, and everything is just done for us before we even go and create the visualizations. It's going to be more performant. We're not creating a call to the Google Maps API on the client that might slow down our application. So here's what we have before we push to master, and then, ta-da, we have latitude and longitude for every single entry. Then here, remember how that table was filtering as we typed in the input? We're going to use a computed property for this to allow them to search in that field. And if you're not familiar with computed properties in Vue, they're actually super powerful, and they're an important part to understand. So they're calculations that are cached based on their dependencies, and they'll only update when needed. So it means they're extremely performant when they're used well. And they look like a method, but they're not actually a method. They're used like data. So if I use that filtered data, instead of calling it like a function, I'm actually going to use it in my table. So here's like, table. If you're familiar with, Angular, you're going to be very comfortable here. We stole everything from you. So basically, similar thing. Just replace the ng with v here, and then that filtered data is what I'm talking about. And here you can see it in action. If we pick the conference, now as we type, that table will go and update super performantly. As soon as we type something, it will filter. So you might have noticed on our globe, we need a pin for each latitude and longitude. But that's not all we're doing. We have to make it longer for repeat instances. We had those longer pins when we were there a few times. So we have to check if a location already exists. And if it does, we're going to increment it. If not, we're going to create some new values for them. So we'll use the data in this format to feed into our globe visualization. And to work with Three.js, we're really mounting it into the DOM on a single element. The code to create the globe is fairly large, so I'm actually creating a mixin that I'm going to bring in Vue, and I'm going to call it on mounted. So you may notice that if you want to use a texture in Three.js, I found that bringing in the texture in the mounted hook and then passing it in as a parameter to that mixin actually makes it work just a little bit faster. So that's just like something I've noticed after playing with Three.js and Vue quite a bit. And not that you'd want to do this, but because Vue and Three.js play so well together, it's really easy to update that data visualization. So for instance, in one line of code, I could change that globe from a sphere to an icosahedron or like a myriad of other shapes. So we can do a ton of things with Vue.js and data visualization, and especially serverless functions to clean our data and have everything be super performant, and the world of data visualization is our oyster. Serverless functions in Vue allow us to accomplish a lot without a lot of infrastructure. It's so cool how these technologies let you play between them and work so seamlessly together and accomplish a variety of tasks so quickly. I hope this helps you get you started working with serverless functions and working with them in the future. Thank you.